It seems a single ant is just a bug, incapable of complex things. And that's really the case. An isolated ant does not demonstrate any phenomenal abilities. But what are they capable of communicating? They can both shrink and enlarge their own brain, engage in animal husbandry, breed geese and moths, effectively fight epidemics, disinfect wounds of their comrades. And they do a bunch of complex and simply amazing things. So maybe the intelligence is not in the individual ant, but in the entire ant colony? Just like in the Matrix, the collective intelligence of the entire colony. To answer this question, let's look at the mysteries associated with these amazing insects. Believe me, by the end of this episode, you'll have more than enough food for thought. So, let's get started. Ants, some of the most highly organized and ancient insects on the planet. Unlike termites, relatives of cockroaches, they evolved from ancestors that resembled wasps. On Earth today, there are between 1 and 10 quadrillion individual ants. That is, from 10 to the 15th to 10 to the 16th power of individual ants. And for each of the people, there are about 1 million of these creatures. And their total mass is approximately equal to the total mass of all people. Some scientific studies show that ants make up about 15 to 20% of the total terrestrial biomass of animals, which exceeds the mass of all vertebrates. Ants live practically all over the world. They are absent only in Greenland, Antarctica, and on some oceanic islands. No other group of insects achieves such numbers and density of population. Ants create incredibly large colonies. It is believed that the largest ant colony covers an area of about 6,000 kilometers. It's so large that it spans several countries, including Italy, France, and Spain. Such a small anthill, in which more than 1 billion individuals. Now, a little about ant physiology, because sometimes it seems that they are definitely from another planet. Ants do not have traditional ears like humans. They hear through changes in vibration. An ant's brain is made up of about 250,000 cells, which is more than several times the number in other insects. Some large ant colonies, that is, large colonies of ants, can collectively have as many brain cells as the average human. Let's remember this information. It will be useful. Ants usually have 2 stomachs. One stomach is used for individual feeding of the insect, while the other is intended for exchanging nutrition with other ants in the colony. Ants have clear responsibilities of builders, soldiers, and those who are engaged in the search and gathering of food. If an ant is idle and does nothing for no apparent reason, it is expelled from the anthill. But it is interesting that this even applies to the queen. Ants can expel the queen if she produces too few offspring, and then choose a new one. In reality, there are numerous species and variations. After all, there are not 100, not 1,000, but more than 12,000 known species of ants, which differ in shape, color, size, and organization of life. For example, some species of ants do not have a queen as such, and all workers can reproduce. There are also species in the nests of which live several queens. There are also species in which real armies of clones march. They multiply by cloning through a process known as parthenogenesis. But most species still have a queen. While the standard lifespan of ants is 30 to 90 days, the typical lifespan of a queen who has founded a colony is 5 to 6 years. But some live up to 12 and even 20 years. This is an absolute record in the insect world. The connections between different ants are so diverse that even humans can only envy them. For example, in the entire genus of Amazon ants, worker ants cannot feed themselves or care for the nest, but they can attack the nests of other, smaller ants and steal their pupae. Ants that develop from these pupae will, in the future, care not for their own queen and soldiers. In other species, it has gone so far that the queen simply penetrates into a foreign anthill, kills the living queen there, the worker ants recognize her as their own, and take care of her and her offspring. The anthill itself is doomed after this. Only females capable of capturing the anthill of another species will develop from such a female's eggs. And with the death of all the worker ants, the colony empties. But this is more of an exception. On the whole, most species of ants are usually an example of altruism and self-sacrifice for the benefit of their superorganism, the ant colony, regardless of the peculiarities that sometimes surprise. For example, silver ants scurry across the sands of the Sahara, the fastest in the world. Of course, you can't walk on loose sand, only at speeds approaching 1 meter per second. That's if a person could run 200 meters in the same second. These ants survive not only because of their speed, but also because of their special silver hairs that cover their bodies and reflect sunlight. And these are honeypot ants. In their swollen pouches, they store reserves of sweet liquid that serves as a carbohydrate food for the colony during the unfavorable season. Usually they dry out their honeypots during the winter period, when the foraging stops, bringing in the necessary amount of food for the colony's nourishment. Local Aborigines happily use these sweet balls as food and as a unique delicacy, and they harvest them for sale. And these are leafcutter ants. All they do all day is cut leaves from trees. Besides leaves, they also eat grass. The interesting thing is that they don't eat all this vegetation. Moreover, they can't even digest it. But then why do they need it? The answer will surprise you. These ants are engaged in farming. They are farmers, they grow mushrooms, and they use leaves as fertilizer. The mushroom eats the decomposed plant. Thanks to this, it grows, and that's what the ants eat. And we have ants here, engaged in animal husbandry. They raise aphids, watching over them all their life. The aphids secrete a sweet substance that the ants eat. Other types of ant farmers raise mealybugs, which, like aphids, secrete a drop of sweet liquid when fed. The ant simply approaches the aphid, taps it with its antennae, and gets the desired drop. And these are leafcutter colleagues, Asian weaver ants. They connect and sew tree leaves and use silk as thread, produced by their own larvae. And there hangs on the tree such a spherical nest made of green leaves, around which ants scurry, ready to bite anyone who encroaches on their territory. The jaws of the weaver ants are very long and sharp. Thanks to this, they are able to build a bridge made of dozens and hundreds of their brethren's bodies, which they can cross to another branch in the north if necessary. Some species can walk on water. And if they can't, they can save themselves from flooding by making such rafts. Such a living raft can withstand several months of travel. Some ants eat each other or drown, but this is trivial. The queen's survival is paramount. When fire ants reach any tree, they are saved. For this, they create not only rafts, but also living Eiffel Towers. And these are tree weevils or cephalotes. The shape and size of the head are dictated by the type of tunnel that the species occupies. Some of them have flattened heads, similar to manhole covers. Others have almost square heads, which they will use to block the entrance to the burrow from unwanted guests. One of the largest is the bulldog ant, which people try to avoid. The bite of some species of this genus, for example, the red bulldog ant, can cause severe and prolonged pain that lasts for several days in humans. In some cases, severe allergic reactions and even anaphylactic shock are reported, which can lead to death in particularly sensitive patients. No less dangerous is the bullet ant, named after the toxic venom in its extremely powerful sting. Among the locals, it is also called the 24-hour ant. After all, after a bite, unbearable pain and fever have to be endured for about a day. But these ants don't even need to be pitied. In case of danger, they shoot acid at their enemy, in this case a crow. Probably one of the most unusual in terms of social structure among ants. As their name suggests, these creatures do not produce anthills. Instead, they roam in search of food, but also very organized. On the sides are soldiers with very powerful jaws and sizes several orders larger than the workers. They, in turn, form the main mass of the living flow of insects and carry both food, eggs, and larvae on themselves. They move only during the day, while at night they arrange a lair. For this, they form a living sphere, at the center of which is the queen. But these Indian jumping ants can change the size of their brain and ovaries to fight for the place of the deceased queen. And if they can't climb the career ladder, the proportions of internal organs are restored. A typical colony dies off after the queen's death. But the family of Indian jumping ants is functionally immortal. A few hours after the death of the queen, a struggle for the throne begins in the colony. Ritual fights can last up to a month. During this time, some workers activate their ovaries and make them increase in size fivefold. At the same time, the insect's brain shrinks by 20 to 25%. As they say, laying eggs doesn't require a brain. Such insects become pseudo-queens or worker bees. Typically, colonies of 100 individuals have 5 to 10 of them. Capable of reproduction, they prolong the life of the family and their own. Queens live up to 5 years, while workers live up to half a year. The ability to fully transform into an adult makes Indian jumping ants unique. But what's even more unique is that these physiological changes are reversible. If you isolate such ants from their colonies, in a day or two they stop producing eggs and behave like typical representatives of their caste. And ants also struggle with epidemics, as they live in a confined space with a high microbial load. Among these microbes are pathogens that can wipe out an entire colony. To prevent this, they diligently maintain cleanliness in their dwellings, and also regularly clean each other and themselves. But recently, other adaptations have been discovered that help in the fight against infections. Some ants, for example, collect tree resin that has antimicrobial properties and bring it into the anthill. Scientists call this process collective treatment. In addition, social insects produce substances that kill microbes, which are then applied to surrounding surfaces and the bodies of other insects. And grooming, it turns out, also serves medicinal purposes. By cleaning each other, ants spread small amounts of pathogens. These tiny doses of pathogens help build immunity. Also, black carpenter ants infected with pathogenic bacteria are able to develop immunity and pass it on to the rest of the nest inhabitants. Moreover, infected ants transmit immunizing substances mouth to mouth before they transmit the infection, thereby preparing other ants for infection. And when researchers infected individual ants from 14 colonies with a deadly fungus, the insects behaved more than reasonably. As soon as the ants noticed the appearance of the pathogen, their interaction model changed. The colony divided into groups that contacted each other less frequently than before. Not only the infected, but also the healthy ants reduced their circle of contacts. But their health is clearly not absolute. For example, some parasites seem to behave no less sensibly than the ant itself. Just like in the movies from the Alien series, usually parasites shorten the life of their insect hosts, using their resources. However, a recent study by German biologists showed that one of the species of tapeworm, on the contrary, increases the lifespan of worker ants. Ants are intermediate hosts of tapeworms, and the ultimate goal of these parasites are woodpeckers. Widespread in Western Europe, worker ants become infected with worms while still larvae, and the parasites develop inside the insects until the cysticercoid stage. One ant can be infected with 70 cysticercoids living in their abdominal cavity. And already in the intestines of woodpeckers, which feed on ants, cysticercoids turn into adult tapeworms. Overall, infected ants were less active and practically did not leave the nest, while their healthy counterparts fed them, cared for them, and even carried them around. It seems that due to the additional load, uninfected ants in infected colonies experienced great stress and died earlier. Biologists also believe that parasites contribute to the extension of the host's life, so that woodpeckers have time to eat them. Birds find it easier to attack a calm, infected anthill than to hunt for foraging ants in the grass. Many parasites skillfully manipulate the behavior of the host to increase their chances of survival and continuation of the species. For example, some types of cordyceps fungi cause infected ants to abandon their colony, climb a plant, and hang on it, holding on with their mandibles. After the insect's death, the fruiting body of the fungus grows out of it. In essence, the cordyceps turns the host into a transport vehicle for moving to a location ideal for germination and spore dispersal. Still, considering fungi as a separate form of life and consciousness is quite bold. But does an ant colony have a mind? The complexity and diversity of behavioral reactions of a living organism, the set of its conditioned and unconditioned reflexes, are determined by the complexity of the nervous system. In turn, the complexity of the nervous system is determined by the number of neurons, in our case, the nerve cells of the brain. And it is quite natural that there exists a certain minimum critical number of interacting neurons at which elements of intelligence arise. Such a critical number of neurons can either be one individual with a very simple brain, or several individuals living together in a so-called superorganism. When the individual brain of each such individual is very small and not suitable for survival, but by joining together in a community, some primitive species acquire a collective intelligence that, as we have seen in all these examples, is very successful in solving pressing problems of life. However, there seem to be limits. Otherwise, we would have long been on a planet of intelligent insectoids. So, neurons that are compactly assembled, not in one skull box, but are capable of moving on their own legs, apparently, are not the most successful path on the way to self-awareness and distinguishing oneself from nature. After all, the ant's body can adapt perfectly to changing conditions. But can they change? So far, only humans can foresee the future. Even then, these interventions in nature are difficult to evaluate clearly. Let's ponder over these complex questions after evaluating this issue. Leave your unique comment and see you in the next episodes on our channel.